All right, welcome to today's lessons for Mr. Aguilar's art class. Today is Monday, September 21st, and we're going to be going over our current project, which is an inked line drawing with the emphasis on line variation. So one of the things I want to bring up first is a recap of what we've been talking about, and that's the creative process. So you have the project, brainstorm, rough drafts, selection, execution. So you already have the project with the lesson plan, with the guidelines and objectives set for you. What we did to begin this assignment was we started off with the brainstorm of ideas, like what are possible ideas that you could use for your illustration. And we also kept in mind that some of you guys might want to do abstract, some of you guys might want to do figurative, or a combination of them both. We've already discussed what abstract is, we already discussed what figurative, and we discussed what combining them is. So today I just want to recap and review what we did in class. Um, the first off, I want to talk about the videos that I shared last week as far as the inking process. In our time slots, we don't have enough time for me to really dive into ink, and I don't really expect you guys to sit there and watch it and remember everything. So I linked two videos in our Google Classroom that you can see on the screen. They're by Alfonso Dunn. They're really good. They have a lot of techniques, and the nice thing about it is you can watch the videos and you can pause, pause, exercise, and really get a feel for the inking process. And you can do this at your own speed and at your own time. So I want to make sure that you guys are watching those videos. Now, if we go to my table, in my table we have what we had to do after the brainstorm process, which was our rough drafts. Now, you guys are responsible for creating a minimum of rough drafts, but that's doing the bare minimum. I expect you guys to do more. If you have 6 ideas, 6 rough drafts. 8 ideas, 8 rough drafts. It's important that even if you had a bad idea that you get it down on paper, because then that allows for new ideas to pop into your head. So here's the rough drafts. I've scanned these. I've shared them with you in Google Classroom. And this is one of my classroom demos. Again, you can see all the notes that are included. Don't expect to remember what the squiggly mark was, right? Make sure you have a note. So like, oh, this is a bubble. Same thing here with the octopus ones. These are bubbles, flowers. Make sure you have your notes. The next phase that we went over, and again, this was for Wednesday, Thursday, which you guys are supposed to have done, was sketch out your rough draft. So selection and refinement process. Which rough draft did you select, and did you do the refinement process? So I selected the fish. This is my sketch to the size that I'm going to transfer to my final. And I explored different textures, different graphic elements. The place that I was confused about was my negative space and how I was going to attack my negative space. Was I going to use cross hatching? Was I going to use hatching? Was I going to do solid fills? And then I decided to put some bubbles in there to break up the negative space, but it didn't seem like I was breaking up enough negative space. So what I did afterwards is I looked at some seaweed. Again, I looked at photographs of seaweed, and I drew some different seaweed elements. Now, these were sketches, right, based on my observations. Then I took that and I started exploring, okay, what is that going to look like with ink? And I started practicing with various types of lines. This one has hatching, then I have some stippling. I have some nice line variation with thick to thin lines, a bit of a holding line, which is that thick outer line for emphasis. And I just went through and I started, practicing and messing around. Here I recreated the bottom of the fish, and I started doing this in ink because again I really wanted to explore how am I going to attack this, how much time do I have to invest in it, and then plan for it accordingly. Once you have this done, what I wanted you guys to do was to simply practice inking. And I've also scanned this and shared it with you, and I added notes to it digitally, so you'll see that in the Google Classroom. And we looked at a couple of different approaches. So one, just practicing lines, drawing it, right? Nothing in particular. Here we talked about uh, not using short little strokes to draw, but doing nice curves. Not doing short little strokes to draw a straight line, but come in and really draw that straight line. So we practiced that. We talked about adding that holding line or thicker line variations to create separation. So if you look on the back, you can see it's 2 panels of the beetle. Um, adding a darker holding line to make something pop out. We talked about using references. If you're going to do something figurative and you want to do something that's leaning towards more of the textures and representing textures, well, then you really need to look at references and you really need to practice how are you going to show those textures, how are you going to indicate your lights and darks, and really practice with different inking styles. But the same thing, same owl, you can also take a very graphic approach and do more of a Zentangle process. And my advice is go to what with you're comfortable with. So whatever you're comfortable with, that's where you should lean into. So if you really like doing this stuff and that's what you enjoy doing, go here. If you're more of a graphics person, go here. If you're more abstract, look at some abstract art, look at some geometric art, some basic designs, and use that as your starting point. So I don't want to influence people to do one way or the other. I always say whatever way you find yourself naturally leaning towards, go in that direction. One last thing I want to go over before we move on to the next phase, which is your final process, which is the execution. Um, every time I start inking, I always have a little piece of paper or something that I work on the side, and I just warm up my hand with the ink. Sometimes the pen needs to be warmed up. Sometimes that ink is a little dried on the edge, and you gotta really get that ink flowing. So as I move on in the inking process, you're going to see different parts of this drawing. You're going to see these random little strokes. And these random little strokes are just warm-ups, right? So one thing about art, and I say this in my class all the time, art is a lot like sports. Even the best athletes in the world, and we can talk about the NBA, before every game they have a shoot around, right? They practice, they do warm-ups, practice their layups, practice their jump shots, practice their dribbling, right? So they have their warm-ups, and these are the best athletes in the world playing basketball. Take that approach to art. Before you work on your final, before you start committing something, practice, warm up. Because the one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to warm up or practice on your final, especially if you're halfway done with it, and create some marks that you're going to be really unhappy with, and you're going to feel like, I need to redo it. I'm not happy. I need to restart. Just avoid that. That's what this other sheet's for. This other sheet's for exploration. This other sheet's for practice. This other sheet's for warming up. That's what this sheet is meant for. Your drawing that you use, that's meant as your reference for you to look at. And sometimes you also want to include the photographs that you're looking at. So anything that you can draw information from to help you out with your final, please use that. And then again, I'm going to reemphasize, always warm up before you start with the final. Now, limitations to what I have. This hover cam, not very good. You really can't see the details like I want you to see in this. I scanned it. Problem with scanning is the light pencil marks from the transfer, they don't really pick up on the scanner, just the black. So hopefully you guys can see this in here. Okay, so you see the pencil drawings. This is where I added some of that seaweed. So you can see where I put it in the back. I have some bubbles indicated. I have some other negative spaces like in here. I'm probably just going to add more bubbles. When I go to the bottom, right, I got a big chunk of negative space and a big chunk of negative space. I want to add some elements in that for two reasons. Number one, if I decide to do this for the entire background, this takes forever. So the less space I have to do that in, the faster this will be. So I want to put some other elements in there. But when I do that, I don't want to make tangents. And tangents is basically saying, I don't want to draw like this or part of this and having it touch the fish. Because once it touches the fish, you have two different elements, right? And they form that edge or that line, and it creates a tangent between two different objects. I want to avoid that. So I want to make sure that if I do anything, it's going to be like right in here, and it's not going to get anywhere near the fish. You know, the top part of it will come here, and I'll add some little seaweed in here, maybe another little piece here. Same thing over here. I'll come in, add some seaweed there, and I'm just going to bring it in. And I'm going to avoid touching any of these because I don't want any tangents. Even on this backdrop, I have it overlapping, but I make sure none of my edges are touching any other edge. So there's always going to be some kind of separation. Always going to be some kind of separation. I'm never going to have this touching that. I don't want that tangent. Even up here, I made sure that there's separation. In reality, this will be a thinner line. This will be a thicker line when all said and done. So this will pop out more because I'm going to put a darker holding line on it no matter what. And then these lines will be thinner, so they'll appear to recede into the backdrop. Um, so today's objective, you were supposed to already have transferred this on Friday. So the transfer should be done. The pencil drawing should be transferred onto your sheet. Today, the only thing you should have to do is to trace your lines for the inking process. And this is just the very beginning of the process. You're simply tracing your outlines for your illustration. Notice too that in here I've left off all the detailed lines. I left off all those textural elements. I left off all the textural elements here. I only want to draw the main lines down on paper to trace on ink, because drawing these lines in pencil and then trying to recreate them exactly with your exact same hand stroke in ink is very, very difficult, if not impossible. So I'd rather just have sections broken up that I can draw my ink lines for my sections, and then inside of each section I can add my thinner lines. So as I progress with this, I'm going to keep scanning it and showing you guys in class. This is basically a recap of what we did. If you have any questions, please post a question in Google Classroom, send me an email, or be ready to ask that question when we have class tomorrow. Thank you.